The three of us. I'm going to have to do so. Pardon? I'm sorry, Kevin, you're right. We are in what might be a most favorite book in all of the prophets. And I think as you come to learn what, if you do not already know what the book of Habakkuk teaches, that you will come to love it too. The reason is because of the timeless message that the book of Habakkuk gives to God's people. And that is because it is most difficult to trust the Lord in circumstances where you see sin and evil go unpunished. And yet you have to trust in God's promises according to his revelation. And that is exactly what we see unfolding for us in the book of Habakkuk. There's some questions, and when you study the Bible, you have sort of we'll say like two different games that are a part of studying the Bible. We study the Bible to understand it so that we can believe it and obey it. But in the course of studying the Bible, we do see that there's questions that we have to ask and try to answer. And we don't always get the answers that we may want. But one of the questions that arises as we study the Bible is, when was this book written? Who are the individuals as well as the nations, the peoples that are involved? What are the events that are being described? And there's definitely some debate about the timing of Habakkuk and who all the players are in Habakkuk's prophecy. And I'll tell you what I think, but just know that there's some differences. And the reason that there's debate is because it's not crystal clear from reading the book of Habakkuk itself. We have references to things that we then try to place using other material. But one of the things that is absolutely agreed upon is, like, what is the message of Habakkuk? And we find two things that are in tension in the book of Habakkuk. The first is that wickedness is being done and justice is not seen. So we'll see this in there's two different, we'll call them sort of players. Habakkuk is going to ask God questions. If you heard Tim teach the book of Job, it was excellent. If you didn't, you should go back and listen to Tim explain the book of Job. Habakkuk is a unique prophet because it's only in Habakkuk that you begin to have a prophet asking questions about God in light of what he sees and also what he knows God has promised, like Job asks questions about God. But there's a difference with Habakkuk. In Job is defending his innocence throughout the book. Now, at the end of the book, he changes that. But in Habakkuk is not defending the innocence of what I think is the people in Judah. He admits their sinfulness. So his question, while similar, is a little bit different. What Habakkuk is asking God is, why, with evil being present, is injustice the only thing that I see? Or to say it another way, why do I not see you, God, show up and judge those who do evil? The fancy pants definition of this word is called theodicy. All right, theodicy. It's a question that is trying to wrestle with the problem of evil. Job does address, in his own way, this question. The book of Job does. And Habakkuk also addresses the problem of evil. But we're going to be able to see how there is a resolution to this. But first, we're able to say what is agreed upon is that Habakkuk is observing, first, wickedness being done in Israel with no justice being seen. So let's look at the first 4 verses. Now, verse 1, there's only 2 verses that we're able to see that Habakkuk is mentioned explicitly. That's in verse 1 of chapter 1 and verse 1 of chapter 3. Do you see that? That's all we get about Habakkuk. You can't learn anything else about Habakkuk in the Bible apart from those 2 verses. Now, there's some other places, like, have you ever heard of the apocryphal book Bel and the Dragon? All right, he's mentioned in there, but he's not mentioned in any way that really would help us. I would say it's not a truthful reference. It's in a vision in Bel and the Dragon that Habakkuk is seen to be transported to Daniel in the lion's den, such that he sort of sustains Daniel while he's in the lion's den. So that's not a part of the Bible, and that's not credible information for us to say, therefore we learn that's also Habakkuk. But you can learn a little bit, at least, about whatever the author of Bel and the Dragon thought about Habakkuk in this vision. But we don't really know much about Habakkuk apart from he was in Judah. But we do read his book, and we start in verse 2. And this is the age-old question. All right, this is what God's people have often cried out to God, and many times in their life. How long, O Yahweh, will I call for help, and will you not hear? I think it's helpful just to be able to say, did the Spirit of God inspire Habakkuk to cry out to God with this question? Yes. There is a place where we're able to read it here for a right question of God about the presence of evil, observing evil, and then not seeing justice and crying out to God for that. For I would just want to sort of suggest to you, both the Psalms and here in the book of Habakkuk, that there is a good example of what to do when you see evil. Go to God in prayer. And so here's the first prayer of Habakkuk. He cries out to God, how long, O Yahweh, will I call for help, and will you not hear? I cry to you violence, yet you do not save. Why do you make me see wickedness and cause me to look on trouble? Indeed, devastation and violence are before me, and there is strife, and contention is lifted up. Therefore, the law is ignored, and justice never comes forth. For the wicked surround the righteous. Therefore, justice comes forth perverted. So we're clearly able to see what really is Habakkuk wrestling with. He's seeing evil being done. He's seeing God's law being broken, and he does not see justice being executed. Now, we see in these 3 verses, verse 2, 3, and 4, what he sees and why he is crying out to God. But what do we not see? Who's doing it? Right? We don't get any detailed information about, well, where is this wickedness being done? And so this is where different Old Testament scholars, they don't come to the same conclusion. Some think that this could be someone outside of Israel doing injustice within Israel. I'm not persuaded that's what he is referring to. I think he is actually referring to within Israel, and this is the southern kingdom, so Judah, the practice of the Judeans is evil. Not all of the Judeans. Habakkuk clearly is not one of them. But when you look at those who are in positions of power and leadership, they are doing evil. And that's what Habakkuk sees, and that's what he's crying out to Yahweh about. So I think, therefore, these 3 verses are the initial prayer to Yahweh, that wickedness is being done in Israel, and yet God is not showing justice. We then see God answers. So it's a prayer. First prayer, Habakkuk's serves as a model for how the righteous should respond as we do see evil done to God's people. Unfortunately, evil even done by those who have the name of God's people. How should you respond? We should call out to God. Habakkuk does that. I think in this way he is an example. And so in verse 5, we begin to see that there is an answer that Yahweh gives. Start with me in verse 5. So Habakkuk is now revealed from God what his answer is to this question. See among the nations and look. Be also astonished, be astounded, because I'm doing something in your days you would not believe if it was recounted to you. For behold, I am raising up and I mispronounce this word all the time, so I'm going to ask that you sort of correct me, all right? It's the Chaldeans, but I tend to call it the Chaldeans, right? So you can just sort of laugh and snicker, and then I'll know like I misspoke. I am raising up the Chaldeans, that bitter and hasty nation who walks on the breadth of the land to possess dwelling places which are not theirs. They are dreaded and feared. Their justice and exaltation come forth from themselves. Their horses are swifter than leopards and sharper than wolves in the evening. Their horsemen come galloping. Their horsemen come from afar. They fly like an eagle swooping down to devour. All of them come forth for violence. Their horde of faces moves forward, and they gather captives like sand, and they mock at kings, and rulers are a laughing matter to them. They laugh at every fortress and heap up dirt and capture it. Then they will sweep through like the wind and pass on, but they will be held guilty, they whose power is their God. So God answers Habakkuk's cry. And his answer almost adds another difficulty to the present difficulty that Habakkuk is having. And we'll see that come up in his second prayer. But verses 5 through 11 reveal that Yahweh's answer to Habakkuk's cry is that the pagan nation, or the pagan peoples, they're called the Chaldeans, it's this emerging Babylonian empire. So Habakkuk is the prophet who is sort of in the transition period geopolitically. And we've learned in the prophets, what is geopolitics? It's just the theater that God is showing forth his glory as he is keeping his promises to his people. It's just how it's working out is announcements of coming judgment followed by a future salvation. But the nations being used as instruments in God's hand to judge the sins of his people, only for those very nations to be judged for their sins, illustrates God is the sovereign one who uses nations to accomplish what he has decreed. And that's just what Yahweh does in answer to Habakkuk's cry. And that is Habakkuk, I'm going to do something that if you could see it, it would blow your mind. I'm going to take the Babylonians and I'm going to bring them to be the instrument to punish Judah for Judah's sins. So in that sense, Yahweh is answering, I'm going to punish. I'm going to bring justice. I actually see what you see, and I will do something about it. The problem is, and this is where we go next, verse 12, that raises a whole nother set of, in one sense, pretty similar questions. Look at verse 12. This is the second prayer of Habakkuk. Are you, and in your translation, if you're reading, say, from the New King James or the New American Standard or the Legacy Standard, you see that you is the Y in you is capitalized, indicating that it's Yahweh. Now, this is Habakkuk speaking to Yahweh. Are you not from everlasting, O Yahweh, my God, my Holy One? We will not die. You, O Yahweh, have placed them to judge, and you, O Rock, have established them to reprove. Your eyes are too pure to see evil, and you cannot look on trouble. Why do you look on those who deal treacherously? Why are you silent when the wicked swallow up those more righteous than they? And you have made men like the fish of the sea, like creeping things without a ruler over them. And this is, given. It's not in the original, but the Chaldeans bring all of them up with a hook, drag them away with their net, gather them together in their fishing net. Therefore, they are glad and rejoice. Therefore, they offer a sacrifice to their net and burn incense to their fishing net, because through these things their portion is rich and their food is fat. Will they therefore empty their net and continually kill nations without sparing? I'm going to ask you a real question. So this is a real class. What is Habakkuk in this second prayer? What is now his problem with God's decision? So his first prayer in the verses 2 through 4 is, why is there evil being done in Israel, and there is not justice from you, God, to punish? And then God reveals, oh, I'm going to punish. In the future, I'm bringing these Chaldeans, and they will be my instrument of punishment for Judah's sins. And so now he says, but hold on. What's his problem now? That is Habakkuk's problem. This question that he has.
Chaldeans aren't going to be punished, or they will prosper in this?
Okay, it's twofold.
Chaldeans.
Yeah, that's I hear it. I hear the mistake. I want to say Chaldeans too. All right. If you were to compare the righteousness according to the revelation of Habakkuk, are the Chaldeans more or less righteous than the Judeans? According to what Habakkuk says, here's a place where you're able to see. Look at the end of verse 13. Why are you silent when the wicked swallow up those more righteous than they? So who's more righteous? Judah. Now, it's not that Judah's righteous. It's just compared to the Chaldeans, they are more righteous. So now he's asking this problem. How is it, Yahweh? And you notice that he began first with the character of God. You look at verse 12, and he says, truly, God is eternal. He is everlasting. Yahweh is holy. Do you see that in verse 12? He is the rock. He is the one who has established his people. He is sovereign. Right? So he's not asking a question that doesn't have the character of God sort of off, in left field. He's really thinking rightly about the character of God. And he's thinking, God, since you are this, how is it that you're going to bring people who are more wicked than the ones that you're actually judging? That seems to be a problem with Habakkuk right now. How is it that you can use these Chaldeans to be the instrument of judgment in the life of Judah because of Judah's sins, when they're worse than Judah? And then he's able to, in one sense, to explain what's the result of the Chaldeans coming and bringing their treachery when they come and they capture and defeat Judah. What do they do after they have won this victory over Judah? Now, all of this is being foretold. So these are not events that have happened. This is God revealing to Habakkuk what God is going to bring about. And that includes, God reveals to Habakkuk, what will the Chaldeans do after they defeat Judah? This is described in verses 15 and through 17. Okay, they continue to slay the nations, but notice when they are done slaying the nations, which includes Judah, what will their response be? A, will they give God thanks? Or B, will they commit idolatry? They'll commit idolatry. And look at the way it is described. They will gather together in their fishing net, and then they will rejoice. And verse 16 says, they'll offer a sacrifice to their net. They'll burn incense to their fishing net, because through these things their portion is rich and their food is fat. So they will actually commit idolatry, worshiping the idol of their net, which gave them the victory instead of God. And Habakkuk is saying, like, how God is this consistent with your nature? Now, in case you're wondering, these questions don't come from Habakkuk because he's not a believer. And when we come to chapter 2, we're able to see very clearly that Habakkuk was a believer. Even with these questions, he's still believing. And this is a very important distinction. When Christians ask questions about seeing evil being done, and then wondering how God can this evil be done and you not visit injustice, Christians ask those questions while still believing. So Habakkuk does this, and notice what we read. I will stand on, this is chapter 2, verse 1. I will stand on my guard post and station myself on the fortification. I will keep watch to see what he will speak to me and how I may respond when I am reproved. Then Yahweh answered me and said, write down the vision and write it on tablets distinctly, that the one who reads it may run. For the vision is yet for the appointed time. It pants toward its end, and it will not lie. Though it tarries, wait for it will certainly come. It will not delay. Behold, as for the proud one, his soul is not right within him, but the righteous will live by his faith. And indeed, wine betrays the haughty man, so that he does not stay at home. He enlarges his appetite like Sheol. He is like death, never satisfied. He also gathers to himself all nations and assembles to himself all peoples. Well, two things we're able to see in what chapter 2 reveals for us in its beginning. And that is, number one, we see in the first verse that Habakkuk is he now has to wait. And how does Habakkuk respond to waiting? Verse 1. Here's your choices. Does he accept it? Or does he sort of complain or reject God having to say, wait for the appointed time? Well, look at this one. Look at how it says, I will stand on my guard post and station myself on the fortification. I will keep watch to see what he will speak to me and how I may respond when I am reproved. Then Yahweh answered me and said, write down the vision and write it on tablets distinctly, that the one who reads it may run, for the vision is yet for the appointed time. It pants toward its end, it will not lie. Though it tarries, wait for it. It will certainly come. It will not delay. So verse 1, he's picturing himself like if maybe your mom actually, maybe she had a station when she was in the Marine, and she had she had some duty where she had to sort of look out for people coming. And so she had to be faithful in her duty and just wait and keep watch. Habakkuk kind of used that way of referring to himself as the prophet waiting on Yahweh to give the revelation, which if you're going to be a good soldier, or in this case, watchman, you're going to have to wait patiently and ready to receive when God reveals it. So I think this illustrates that he actually, even though he's got questions, he believes. He's waiting on God to reveal it, and then he will do what Yahweh reveals to him. He even says that I may respond, how I may respond when I am reproved. Yahweh tells him what to do, and Yahweh reveals to him in verse 3, when is God going to bring his judgment? When is God going to bring this visitation of divine justice? Here's your choices. Now or in the future? In the future. And yet, just because it's in the future, does that mean that God has not determined when it's going to happen? Verse 3 says, for the vision is yet for the appointed time. So Yahweh is revealing to Habakkuk that he is going to visit in judgment for sins, but it will be in the future according to Yahweh's appointed time. See, this is one of the things that we have to learn to be able to trust God with how God is going to keep his promises and is going to vindicate his name and his nature when it comes to sin and evil done in this world. He doesn't do it according to our timetable. God is the one who has appointed the times in which he will come, and he will execute his justice. And those who fear him, those who believe him, those who trust him, they will wait and they will trust God to come at his appointed time. Now, for my favorite students in the room, you who are younger, you might not yet have had too many opportunities for this lesson to be learned. But it won't take long. All the other adults in the room are able to say, yep, the Lord definitely will teach this lesson. And this is it's a very difficult lesson. What makes it difficult is that we actually have to trust God when we do not see God do what we know God will do. So if God says that he is just, and he is, and therefore God says that he punishes sin, and he does, but yet you do not see God punishing sin and showing his justice, you're going to have to believe something that you cannot see. What do we call believing something that you cannot see? What? Faith. Now look at what verse 4 says. Behold, as for the proud one, his soul is not right within him, but in contrast to the proud, the righteous will live by his faith. So if you were Habakkuk or you were a righteous remnant within Judah and this was the message, practically, what did you need to do having heard this portion of Habakkuk's message? What did Habakkuk himself have to do? He had to have faith. He had to trust that God indeed was going to do what God said he would do, but what God said he's going to do is coming in the future, which means Habakkuk didn't see it happen. But as one who was righteous, he lived by his faith in what God promised to do that would display his character, but yet it was not something that could be presently seen. I would suggest to you, and we're not done with the book of Habakkuk, we'll see this, I think, well, it's the capstone to the end of the book of Habakkuk. what does this issue of the problem of evil, as we really do face it in our life, what does this issue really, in one sense, manifest or expose in the life of the believer? What does the problem of evil, and we see it here beginning to kind of surface in Habakkuk in verse 4. What does it expose in the life of the believer? In this case, I think Habakkuk is the example.
Trusting God when it doesn't make sense.
That's right. Would it really require faith? And let's just make sure we're able to see some things like at your household. When mom or dad says, if you do this, then this will happen. And this happening is like not pleasant. And you know, because in the past, when someone has disobeyed mom and dad's instruction, they actually do what they said they were going to do, and somebody receives some unpleasant consequences. Does it really require you to have that much faith when you're thinking like, well, if you don't do what you were told to do, justice is going to show up? Like in one sense, you're able to think because it's not that long, right? It could have been like 3 hours ago that you saw that happen. You're like, this really happens, and it happens daily if you don't do this. Habakkuk is not looking at seeing something like, yeah, and God punished our evil leaders in Judah last week. See, he hasn't seen God punish the evil leaders in Judah last week. He's not seeing it at all. And now God says, oh, I will, and I'm going to do it by raising up the Babylonians, and they're going to come in and they're going to conquer them, and I will bring about a punishment. And he's like, well, hold on. Well, what about those who are more evil, bringing about the judgment of the Judeans? And God says, just trust me. In the future, in the appointed time, I'm going to do what's right. See, that's a little harder, isn't it? And yet that's exactly what Habakkuk is facing. And we're able to see that so he does wait on the Lord, and he lives by his faith. Now, we start in another section. In this section, there is an oracle, and that is like an announcement, a proclamation of woes. And these begin in verse 6, and there are 5 of them. They go through verse 19 in chapter 2. I'm just going to tell you what they are, but they're all against the Chaldeans. So what God now is revealing to Habakkuk, and what Habakkuk now pronounces, is though God did raise up the Babylonians to come and to be the instrument of his judgment against the sins of those in Judah, that doesn't mean that the Babylonians won't also receive Yahweh's punishment for their sins. No, in fact, they will receive punishment for their sins. And these 5 woes tell them what Yahweh is going to do to the Babylonians. Again, we're able to see, is God the judge of nations and peoples? He is. So while we think about nations doing whatever nations want to do to other nations, and we think like, I don't see God showing up, the Bible reveals to us, no, the reasons that nations rise and nations fall is in one sense because that's God's hand bringing them up for his purposes and putting them down for his purposes. And so these, again, all of this is in the future. The Babylonians are in one sense, they're just, they are intact, but they are not the world dominant power that they will come to be. It's in this intermediate transition between the Assyrians and the coming rise of the Babylonian Empire. And so even though they will yet come to be this world-dominating people, Habakkuk reveals God's going to judge them in the future for their sins. The first woe is that Yahweh is going to devour them. Because the Babylonians, as world powers, and you can go through human history and see, this is like something sick, and yet something God has decreed to exist. Men and nations generally are not satisfied with a certain degree of power. So nations, just like people, want more. Like here, what's your favorite cereal? Are you allowed to have cereal? Okay, is that a bad thing too these days? All right.
Do donuts.
All right, donuts. All right, a donut. Hey, once you eat one donut, are you kind of like, man, I'm so glad I just had one? Or do you think, I want another donut? I want another donut. All right. That's the way nations are when it comes to their power, to their realm, to their resources. Like, is it just enough to have that much? Or do you think, no, I think our borders need to get bigger. I think our resources need to be deeper. I think we need to be richer. That's the way they are. And so the Chaldeans, the Babylonians did this, and Yahweh says to them in verses 6 through 8 in chapter 2, you have devoured nations, so I will devour you. So God ultimately brought about the judgment of the Babylonians. He reversed what they did. The next woe is in verses 9 through 11. Yahweh condemns them, that is to say, he damns them, he judges them for their injustice. It is helpful. We have different ways that nations come together and they create so-called, authorities that can punish war crimes. And it is true that there are crimes that are done in war. But ultimate justice for all crimes done in war are done by Yahweh. And that's what Yahweh says he's going to do to the Babylonians for the crimes that they committed in their wars. And then in verses 12 through 14 in chapter 2, he says that he's going to reverse their victory. That is to say that everything that they achieved through their sinful conquest of nations and peoples and their resources, it's going to be for nothing because, and this will look at the last part of verse 14. The last part, that is verse 14. For the earth will be filled with the knowledge of the glory of Yahweh as the waters cover the sea. When nations are conquering other nations, peoples conquering peoples, killing and stealing and taking, whose glory are they sort of filling the earth with? Their own. Like, what flag do they plant? Well, Yahweh says through Habakkuk, the Babylonians, that's what they will do. And yet what Yahweh will do is I will fill the whole earth with my glory. Which is to say, all that you conquered is for nothing. Now here I think we're able to see that while this is Yahweh's revelation to Habakkuk, as Habakkuk is wrestling with the questions that he has in his particular day, and Yahweh's revealing what he is going to do in the future, this particular aspect of what Yahweh reveals to Habakkuk is the ultimate application of Jesus's redemption. This is also helpful. Do you wonder, why did Jesus come and take on human flesh, live the perfect life so that he could die for sinners like me and you, be raised and go and sit at the Father's right hand? He did it for a number of reasons, but in one sense, for the grand and ultimate application so that he would return. And he would establish over the whole earth the glory of Yahweh. Explicitly, objectively, physically. and all of the effort of the nations, it will be reversed. And Yahweh and his glory will be over all the earth. That's what Jesus has accomplished. And Habakkuk reveals that this is going to come, and the Babylonians thus, they are going to have all their victory count for nothing. The next woe is in 15 and 17. The Lord is going to make the Babylonians drink from the cup of his wrath. They were a wicked people. If you really want to be afraid of your own sinfulness, sometimes when you read history and you learn about the sinfulness of other peoples at other times, just make sure you realize there's no difference between them and you. You read about the Japanese and their internment and concentration camps that they did, the torturous things that they did. It's really, really concerning. And yet that's what I'm like. The Babylonians were like that. And what Yahweh says is, you've made other people drink from the cup of your wrath. You're going to drink from the cup of my wrath. Yahweh punishes the Babylonians for the sins that they committed. That's ultimate justice. And that's what Yahweh promises that he's going to do to the Babylonians in verses 15, 16, and 17. And then lastly, in this last woe, in the end of chapter 2, Yahweh is going to punish them for their idolatry. See what they did when they went to war and then they won wars is they just committed idolatry. And so we're told about their graven images and who made it and its worthlessness. And Yahweh says that he is going to punish them for their idolatry. And look at in verse 20, we then see something that changes. This is sort of like a transition. But Yahweh is in his holy temple. Let all the earth be silent before him. Now, just remember, students, what was just described to us in verses 6 through 19 in chapter 2. And what was also described to us in verses 5 through 11. So that is the Chaldeans coming and being God's instrument of judgment against Judah for its leader sins. And then God judging the Chaldeans, that is the Babylonians, for their sins when they came and conquered Judah. Had any of that happened? So if you went and saw Habakkuk, has anything changed in his life? Nothing. It's still the same. And yet, Yahweh reveals that he's in his holy temple, and let all the earth keep silent before him. And now, this what also separates Habakkuk. Here is going to be a hymn. You don't really find hymns outside of the Psalms. And so we see it says that it is a prayer of Habakkuk the prophet, but then it tells us according to the Siganoth, which is indicating some kind of liturgical instruction for how the hymn of Habakkuk was to be sung, or you either listened or participated in it. And now Habakkuk's hymn is going to show, one, he sees God, we'll call that revelation, and then he believes God according to his revelation. Now, there's a fancy word that they use to describe what is going to come in verses 2 all the way through verse 15, and it's called a theophany or theophanic vision. I'm sure that will impress your friends. And what we're wrestling with when we create words like theophany is to say that Habakkuk was given visually. He saw the glory of Yahweh. Right? That's not exactly the same thing as he entered into the presence of Yahweh, but it is to say that he was given a revelation of the glory of Yahweh. So there's a difference, and we call that a theophany. God showed up and revealed himself in his glory to Yahweh. And this is the hymn that Habakkuk wrote. O Yahweh, I have heard the report about you, and I fear. O Yahweh, revive your work in the midst of the years. In the midst of the years, make it known. In rage, remember compassion. God comes from Teman and the Holy One from Mount Paran. Selah. His splendor covers the heavens, and the earth is full of his praise. His brightness is like the sunlight he has raised flashing from his hand, and there is the hiding of his strength. Before him goes pestilence, and plague comes after him. He stood and measured out the earth. He looked and startled the nations. So the perpetual mountains were shattered, the ancient hills collapsed. His ways are everlasting. I saw the tents of Cushan under wickedness, and the tent curtains of the land of Midian were trembling. Did Yahweh's fury burn against the rivers, or was your anger against the rivers, or was your wrath against the sea that you rode on your horses, on your chariots of salvation? Your bow was made bare, rods were sworn unto battle by word. Selah. You split the earth with rivers. The mountains saw you and writhed. The downpour of waters passed by. The deep gave forth its voice. It lifted high its hands. Sun and moon stood in their lofty places. They went away at the light of your arrows, at the brightness of your flashing spear. In indignation you marched through the earth. In anger you trampled the nations. You went forth for the salvation of your people, for salvation with your anointed. You crushed the head of the house of the wicked to lay him bare from thigh to neck. Selah. You pierced with his own sharpened rods the head of his throngs. They stormed in to scatter us. Their exultation was like those who devour the afflicted in secret. You tread on the sea with your horses, on the surge of many waters. Now we'll stop. Does that sound like anything in the past that Yahweh has done? Please note waters and horses and a destruction of enemies. There's some particular locations that may also help us. Teman, Mount Paran, Cushan, Midian. The Exodus, and when God met them at Sinai. So in this theophany, this vision of God's glory, Habakkuk is sort of explaining the way in which he is seeing God in terms of what God has done in the past. One, to destroy their enemies, and two, to save his people to the place where he will come and be present among them. Now, all of these details would have a place if we wanted to look at them and see how this was used elsewhere in the Old Testament and how this would be rightly understood. But I'm going to try to sum it all together in this way. This vision of God from verse 2 to verse 15, we could sum up in this way, that this vision of seeing God was in one sense the same thing that we hear when we hear the message of the gospel. Has God in the past, has he acted in order to judge his enemies and save his people? He has. Christian, when Jesus Christ came and God poured out his wrath on his son in his death, did God visit, in that sense, in judgment, the enemies of sin and Satan and death? He did. Those three great enemies that were yours, that would keep you from God, God judged them all in Jesus' death. In a similar way, as this vision is being revealed to Habakkuk, God's past saving deeds definitively and objectively in Israel, bringing them out of Egypt through the Exodus, destroying the Egyptians, and then leading them to Sinai, where he is visibly present among his people on the mountain. It's kind of like he's showing them the same similar promises. So now we have this pause, and then we will see Habakkuk's response. Now, again, remember, has anything changed in Habakkuk's circumstances? No. Let's see how he responds. I heard, and my inward parts trembled. At the sound, my lips tingled. Decay enters my bones, and in my place I tremble, because I must wait quietly for the day of distress, for the people to arise who will invade us. Though the fig tree should not blossom, and there be no produce on the vines, though the yield of the olive should fail, and the fields yield no food, though the flock should be cut off from the fold, and there be no cattle in the stalls, yet I will exult in Yahweh. I will rejoice in the God of my salvation. Yahweh, the Lord, is my strength, and he has set my feet on like hinds' feet and makes me tread on my high places, for the choir director on my stringed instruments. So this vision of Yahweh cast in terms of past salvation through the judgment of his enemies becomes in one sense what Habakkuk responds to, and he says, I will wait. I will wait on Yahweh to come and to bring what he has promised, and he will exult in Yahweh, and he will rejoice in the God of his salvation. Right? His trust is completely upon what God has revealed him to be, as God has promised to achieve it in the future. That's faith in the character of Yahweh, according to the revelation of Yahweh in fulfilling his promises at the appointed time. Christian, this is the way that you live today, right? You know God has definitively shown up, and he has judged all of the enemies that would keep you from his presence. Jesus' death and resurrection makes very clear the judgment has come and it has been accomplished. And the fact that he is with the Father in heaven ensures us that his sacrifice was sufficient and redemption has been accomplished. But we have to wait for him to return. And while we wait, there will not be perfect justice on this earth. Evil will be done. We will see it, and we will wonder, will God come? Will he visit injustice? And we can respond like Habakkuk. And we can wait quietly for the day of distress. And we will be able to know that the Lord is our strength, and he will make our feet like the hinds, and we will tread on the high places. So, Habakkuk proves for us this is how we respond when we see the presence of evil and we do not see the present justice of God. We respond like Habakkuk. We trust in God's revealed future punishment of his enemies and wait. So Habakkuk, it's a really fantastic book, and there's way more that we could go into, especially like the sophistication of chapter 3. It's a really great little chapter. So some of the messages that we do need to sum up, like these are really helpful. What do we learn about God's justice? What do we learn about God's justice? When we ask questions like, why do the wicked succeed? Why do idolaters advance and achieve much in the present world? Why is there this temporary suspension of divine justice? Yeah. That God has decreed that there is going to be allowed a temporary suspension of divine justice in order that there will be a great execution of final justice at the appointed time. Another question is, how should we respond when we do have to endure the temporary suspension of divine justice and watch evil and idolaters succeed? How should we respond? Exactly. We should trust God's promise in the present that he will come in the future and execute divine punishment. We learned something about idolatry as well. These Babylonians, we saw, what do they offer up to their nets? That's sort of a metaphor for their incredibly successful military tactics. So their weapons, what did they offer up to their weapons? Exactly. They offered up incense, which would have been a form of their idolatrous worship. But then we were able to see that in verse 11, they began to worship the idol of their own success. I think we learned this about idolatry. Idolatry can have a really basic form, and then it advances to still it's the same thing, it's just a little more sophisticated. You can start off worshiping, something that somebody carved and painted with gold, and you can bow down to the object in the commitment to idolatry. But then eventually that could sort of become a little more complicated and sophisticated in the idolater's mind. And then you begin bowing down to the idolatry of your own success, of your own accomplishments. Now, I would just go out on a limb of contemporary application. I think statism is idolatry. I know statism is maybe for my favorite students, not a word that you use. Statism is when people relate to the state, to the nation, to their government in a way that they should only relate to God. They begin to worship and serve the state in a way that they should worship and serve Yahweh. See, it can start out and you'd be able, that's easy, right? They'd have to bow down and worship a flag or something. Well, no, it could start like that, but it actually can take a more subtle and sophisticated approach. In verse 11 of chapter 1, the Babylonians, they worship the idol of their own success, right? If we cannot turn to human achievements, whether that be our own, whether that be your little tribe, or whether that be your nation, and worship them. Lastly, we are able to see that the faith of the righteous rests in the revelation of God's salvation and judgment accomplished and applied in full in the future. So, what do you think would follow? The hope, in one sense, of Habakkuk is what God promises to do in the future, and that will be when this great day of judgment will come. If you were going to put together the book of the 12, what would you put next? What subject do you think that next chapter in the book of the 12 would really give attention to? If Habakkuk ends the way it ends, and he is trusting the Lord, yet awaiting for this visitation of judgment, knowing that God will sustain him, what would you want to be the next chapter in the book of the 12? Way to go. Did you have any inside help with that one? All right, that's right. The day of the Lord. We next will find out that Zechariah gives sustained attention, unlike any other book of the 12, to the day of the Lord. So, any questions?
Actually, I didn't.
Janine?
For the theophany at the end, is that, I'm assuming that's not like Moses seeing the glory of the Lord, that's in person. And it's more like Isaiah.
It is more like Isaiah. It's more like Isaiah. Although I do believe most people do see Moses also having a theophany, that the burning bush was a theophany.
I meant when he passed before him. No,
He couldn't look.
right. Okay,
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Tim.
Had a question that was posed to me while we were going to chapter 3, but in verses 16 and 17, it's talking about the pending invasion and destruction. There's the reference to the fig tree not blossoming, not being produced.
Mm-hmm.
Is there any correlation between that and Jesus cursing the fig tree in anticipation of Roman devastation?
I don't know. I did not exhaust all of my commentaries, so maybe some Hebrew scholar that would be a far better voice than mine could comment on that, but I don't know. Clearly, the language is used by Jesus, but that's a great question. The implication, am I right thinking, Tim, if that is the case, then the implication is who would the faithful remnant be? Because that's what Habakkuk is. Habakkuk is the faithful. He is the righteous who lives by his faith through the judgment. So if Jesus were picking up this image and talking about what did occur.
Who's going to survive? It's going to be righteous.
Yeah. Which I think would say the believing. So I think that would seem to have an implication. And I'm just sort of thinking from the hip with you, if that were the case, it seems to have pretty significant implications upon after Jesus especially uses that imagery to refer to Israel and what happens I could see people having some pretty significant implications from what then does Habakkuk serve as. But I have no idea. I don't know if better thinkers have.
Just to be fair, that was Ellie's question.
Oh, wow.
That's
a great question. So maybe I'll just also add this, and this is really, I think, necessary, though my favorite students have left. Elizabeth, you're still in here, and you're a part of my favorite student crew. Do we have any reason from Scripture to expect that our lives on earth are going to be in any way marked by justice? You do? Can you tell me how? And yet what do we see unfolding, as especially we've gone through the prophets and through, in this case, the 12? Is Israel, do they live righteous lives? So the remnant, the faithful, those who truly do believe, they live amongst the people who do not. And what does God bring? He brings a punishment that brings incredibly difficult temporal circumstances, and they're mixed in with it, and they suffer just like the unrighteous should suffer. And then they receive messages like this: wait, I'm going to bring justice. I think one of the problems that has occurred, and we're going to see the backlash of it, is pastors and Christian parents aren't truthful when it comes to, okay, when you believe the gospel, you don't need to think that you're going to get, whether you call it individual justice or whether you think in social justice terms, there's no promises for that in this present order of things. The promise of that is when Christ returns and this comes in its full and final fulfillment. Now, that doesn't mean that we should in any way be a part of injustice. But I think very clearly here that we need to go ahead and expect what's going to happen to us as people are going to do evil. We're going to see evil go unpunished in this present order of things. And that should be what we expect, and we should not be rocked when that does not happen. And I just found that to be a perennial challenge for many Christians. Somehow they expected this is heaven.
But what is possible is that if we trust and we have faith, that we can have peace in the midst of it.
Yes. Yes.
And that we can come to the place where we can rejoice and praise God in spite of our struggles.
That's right. And that's where Habakkuk's conclusion is the example. So you were right that you can have peace. So believe the promises of God and his revelation, and believe them amid the injustice that you indeed will see, and wait for God's justice to come. We can have peace amid it. All right, that's it. If you have time, we're going to move some of the chairs into the